All right, we're live on the air. This is Flux of Fluxwithit.com, and this is episode number 20 of the Synth Summit Show. I had to look over because I'm doing so many different shows now. But yeah, so this is going to be a pretty cool show because we've got a synth designer who's done a lot of work over a great span of time, and I'm dating you now. I'm making you aged.
Oh man.
But this is Taiho Yamada, and you have a history with synthesizers, you could say.
I guess so.
Yeah,
Been
and
in
now you
the
have
industry for about.
well, so it's not like you're not a relic of the past. You're somebody currently doing interesting things. So and the
Thanks
current
for
new
not
company,
making me relic.
Yeah. So the current new company is Media Overkill, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And so when did Media Overkill start?
It started in the beginning of 2013, and it's basically a couple of guys that have been friends with for a long time. My buddy Rob Rampley does code, and Chris Compton does the IT infrastructure for us, and it's something that kind of came about serendipitously. In 2012, M Audio got sold to In Music. That was the last company that I was working for, and at the same time, Rob had left Line 6, where he was a software architect, and we were both sort of thinking, we had worked together a long time ago at Alesis on synthesizers there, and we found ourselves at this point where we're like, hey, we could potentially make a company here, and we're like, yeah, can we do it? I don't know. Do you think we can do it? And we kind of started working on stuff kind of in the background, and Rob had developed this synthesizer engine, and so there's this really well thought out, well architected platform that we could take in a lot of different directions, and we were trying to figure out an idea of where we should go, and this wave Razer idea sort of popped to the top of the pile. Rob had this thought about slicing up waveforms and recombining them, and I was like, that could be a product. Let's take a look at this. And so we went through several iterations of the oscillator, which is kind of the the meat of that product, and refined it to a point to where we felt like we could start patent proceedings on it, and we're patent pending on this oscillator at this point now.
Now, before we go too deep onto that stuff, let's give just a little bit of background as far as how you got your start in synthesis, and just a little bit about different products that you've done previously. What would you say was like the first? Well, actually, before I even get into that, how did you get into designing synths to begin with?
Well, I've always loved the sound of synthesizers. Back when I was a kid in the 70s, before I even really knew what synthesizers were, like I'd listen to a song and really like it, and then if I go back and look at it now, more often than not, there's like a synthesizer in that song. And a little bit later on, towards the end of the 70s, the Moog Prodigy had just come out, and my dad bought one for me, which was super cool. And so I started, tweaking LFOs and envelopes before I even really knew what those were. I just knew that if I, turned this knob, I could make like a motorcycle sound, or this is the UFO sound, or, whatever, just having fun. Prodigy also had like, pretty smoke and sync sound in it too, which always stuck with me. And then I got into high school. I started, getting into electronic bands like Depeche Mode and Erasure and Kraftwerk. And I bought a JX8P, and I got an S10 sampler that, basically you sampled like, I don't know what it was, like a second maybe on a quick disc. And started, having fun with that. Eventually graduated to an S50 and started, doing my own samples on this S50 and, running loops and things like that. And so, we had this sort of Depeche Mode-ish synth pop band in high school. And it's just always kind of in the background, this sort of love of music and everything. But I was doing acting in high school, and I went to UCLA as a theater major, but always sort of ended up in the music department. I took the electronic music course over there, and they had a giant Moog modular in there. I had a giant EMU modular in there. They had an emulator 2, I think. They had like a synclavier in there, and this is back in the 90s when these things were
stuff too. So
still, yeah. And so I had a lot of fun in there, and I ended up doing more basically sound design for theater. And but I was sort of a sound design specialist in that I could do musical scores and things for theatrical shows, and we ended up doing some live performances at the school with various shows. And so I met like a certain group of people there that were into like the arts and into music, and I ended up out at a dance club here in LA called Cinematic. It was kind of a racy club. There were like, people getting whipped in the back, and there's like, I don't know, there's like porn playing on the monitors, and
nice.
Yeah,
a good wholesome entertainment.
Exactly. But in the middle of all this, I'd come with a group of friends, and among that group was an engineer from Alesis. And in the middle of all this mayhem, we're like talking about sample rates and, bit depths and like how, editing samples and stuff. Yeah, right. So it turned out that Alesis was working on their first synthesizer, the Quadrasynth. And during that period, this was like the summer of like, let's see, 93 that I met this guy at the dance club. And then by the fall, I'd gotten called in as a contractor to work on an aspect of the samples. We were trying to tune them. So the Quadrasynth was a Rompler, and it had pianos and guitars and strings and things like that. And they just sent it all to me and say, hey, are these in tune? So I'd have to like kind of check them and figure it out. And if not, then, we'd have to note how far out it was, and then mathematically calculate to, sample rates to put it back into tune.
Yeah.
And it's sort of my first exposure to developing samples for a ROM. And so I did that for a while, and as the project progressed, they brought me in as a temp sound designer. And so I started, creating presets or managing presets, moving them around, doing some quality assurance on some of them. And then by, let's see, The next thing that came along was the Quadrasynth Plus, which added a 8 megabyte grand piano, which was, you know, huge at the time. But like the whole ROM was 16 megabytes, and you add 8 megabyte grand piano, got ourselves up to a whopping 24 megabytes of samples.
Stop the madness.
Yeah, it was craziness. But that was an interesting time for me, and that, you know, when we were starting to edit the samples, we were using things like Sound Designer 2 and Alchemy, not the synth, but the sample editor back in the day, and Sample Cell to lay out the key maps. You know, I'd learned a lot about manipulating samples and looping them and figuring out how to make them small to like get into that footprint that we had. Because that memory wasn't cheap back then, right?
Yeah, it was gold.
Yeah, and if you're cutting a ROM, it's cheap in mass production, but it's not cheap in like development. You know, you're making a chip, so you have to get everything right, make it small enough to fit in the chip, and then you know, really be sure that you're making it right, because you're doing a run of like, you know, thousands after that, and committing to, you know, thousands of dollars. So that was an interesting experience, learning how to do that. Really brings your sample editing chops up. And then we did a bunch of offshoots of that original engine, everything using the same SG ASIC in combination with the S4 DSP, which the S4 DSP was also used in like the Quadraverb 2 and I believe the MIDIverb 4. And the synths that used that chipset were the QS series. So we did the QS 6, 7, and 8. And then we did the QS 0.1 series. So there was a 6, 7, and 8 of that. And then the 0.2 series after that. And the Quadrasynths were very successful for Alesis. They were like a QS8 was the #1 selling keyboard in the US domestically.
Yeah, that thing went huge.
Yeah, so we were like, Alesis was about a $90 million company at that point, and the synthesizers represented about a third of that revenue. And you know, you're talking about the days when the ADAT was around.
Yeah.
Right. So
that was huge for them too.
Yeah, that made a giant chunk of revenue for them. And I got in kind of towards the end of that. There's still a lot of ADAT money around, but not the same as, you know, when it was in its heyday. Apparently in the heyday, like, people would get bonuses where like they get a bonus and then the next day buy a car.
Nice.
But yeah, I never got a bonus like that, but I
haven't seen music industry bonuses like that in the time that I've been in the trade. So
well, the ADAT, yeah, the ADAT was a phenomenon though. It was like it was something that you know, changed the industry, and it was great for Alesis and allowed us to do, you know, some pretty innovative things. Like when they went after the Quadrasynth, you know, you think of it now as like, okay, hey, it's just a Rompler, but it was the first keyboard to have 64 voices of polyphony. Before that time, I think, you know, the highest you could get was 32. So we really kind of blew it out of the water, and we got a tech award at NAMM for that. Mm-hmm. And I say we, but, you know, I was just starting out at that point. Really, it's, you know, like guys like Keith Barr, who was the owner of Alesis, and guys like Marcus Ryle, who you know, did a lot of the software for Alesis under his company. It was called Fast Forward Designs at the time. but eventually became line 6.
Mhm.
And Marcus was great. He was great to learn under. He was, he was the guy that when we were, had some issue with making a sound or whatever, like we need this extra feature, we would talk to Marcus and say, hey, do you think you could do this? And he'd be like, I don't know. And then he's just like, no promises, probably not. And then like a week later, he'd have it implemented, it'd be done. And like it got me thinking of like, in a way that I'd never thought of before. Like up until that point, you just walk up to a synthesizer and you're like, okay, it is what it is. You just have to deal with it in those terms. But then like being able to work with, stellar code guy like Marcus, and then being able to say, hey, can we do this? It just gets your juices flowing, right? Like one of the first things that I requested was, like in the QS series, there's this little 2x16 display in there. And we had some sliders that could get out of sync with what you had done with it if you changed the preset. Like these are just like controller sliders. Like you turn up the filter or something like that. But as soon as you change a preset, it's out of sync, right? So that was kind of an issue, because when you reach up and grab the slider, it would jump, or it would, maybe you didn't move it in the right direction to try and get it to, start reacting. And so you had this issue of like not knowing where they actually were as far as like the digital readout of them. So I thought like, we have these extra pixels in the display. Can we show a bar graph of, what these sliders are doing? And Marcus thought about it for a while. I think he figured out a way to add a bar graph animation to the character set that was, being displayed in that 2x16 display. And so then we got it. Then the sliders would actually be represented on screen, and you didn't have that problem of wondering like, what are my sliders doing at any given point? And that made me realize like, this is fun for me, like solving user interface problems, like
Nice.
making things easier to use, or like have them give you more information, have them be more fun.
That's really the
So
bottom line.
well, yeah, absolutely. So it got me thinking along those terms, like fairly early on in my career. And I think that's helped me a lot, as I keep doing different projects. But let's see. So we're in the middle of Alesis. We did on the SG-ASIC. That's also the heart of the DM Pro module, which I worked on. That got me into doing drums and understanding the issues with triggering and all the details of manufacturing pads and all that good stuff. And then after that, we did Andromeda, which was
What was your role on the Andromeda project there?
during Andromeda, I went from senior sound designer to director of sound development for Alesis. And so I was in charge of a lot of the voicing, but then we also did some, top panel development.
Mm-hmm.
There was this really brilliant sound designer named Mike Peak at Alesis at the time. And he taught me a lot about sound design and a lot about quality of sound. He had very high standards, which was great. And he was, way into these analog synthesizers. And so we spent a lot of time on the floor of his office, just sketching out the modules of the top panel of Andromeda. And we were in contact with Rob Rampley and Eric Norlander, and they had flown off to Germany to work with Axel Hartmann on the top panel. So we were doing these sort of long distance calls and faxing sheets of paper back and forth, and and then Axel came out with this, I think, really iconic kind of design. Each one of those sort of module areas we called galaxies. It kind of had a vibe of like, clusters, star clusters, and stuff like that, which worked with our name. And we were so happy to have done this project. It's basically like all the parts of the analog synths that we really loved, trying to come together into one unit. Like the ribbon controller was inspired by the CS80. We have the Moog ladder filter in there and the Oberheim state variable. And in both cases, we talked to the original designers and got their blessing to do it. Like, we didn't want to do it without their blessing. Having working on this project gave me the opportunity to meet Bob Moog, who really is the guy that's responsible for getting me into this business that I really love. The Prodigy was my first synthesizer, and beyond that, like, without Bob, we wouldn't have like just a ton of great synth music. But anyway, I got to shake his hand and tell him how much he meant to me, which was great. The all analog Andromeda, it's like, it's like all the pieces of things that we just really loved. Like the oscillators are Moog modular based, just crazy stuff. 16 voices. It was something that I'd never really heard before. Like, I just really had access to mono synths. And when A6 came alive, finally, and you could have 16 voices, and it was 16-part multi-timbral too at the same time. So you could have voices doing different sounds, and you get into mix mode, and you bring up 4 different drums, and then do a bass line, and then do a counterpoint sort of line or lead line, and sequence all that stuff together to make like kind of a groove. That just blew me away. It's like that you'd never hear anything like that out of a synth before.
The other thing that's kind of crazy about it is that you can set like kind of knob depth amounts for like everything on there, and like the amount of control that you have on there beyond just being able to say, okay, I want to control a filter, or I want to be able to control my my sweep or this or that. You can actually go in and dictate like precise amounts of what your knob throw is, which is pretty wild too.
Yeah. But important too, because you can end up with ranges that don't do very nice things. So as a sound designer, it's it's important to be able to set that kind of stuff up. And I've sort of taken that to heart, and it carries on into other designs that I've done, even up to Wave Razer. So that was a big joy and pleasure to work on that Andromeda project. And man, there's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah,
but if we
and they still go for a chunk of change. I mean, people are still after them to this day. It is a sought after synth. Might be what some would consider like really like one of the last of the the really sought after like classics. It's like a true modern classic.
I think so, yeah. And I'm really thankful to have been part of that project. That kind of thing doesn't come along all the time. But hopefully we'll be able to do it again someday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I actually have a friend who like just got his not that long ago, a couple months ago, and he's constantly sending me videos of it, and I'm constantly telling him how much I hate him.
Nice.
He knows who he is. I'm sure he's watching. So, but yeah, the A6, and around that time was when I was actually really kind of getting into synthesis as well. So that was kind of like a holy grail for me as well, just from the outside watching it. And then I guess it wasn't too long after that the Ion project was going on, or was that around? It was pretty close in timeline, right?
It's pretty close, yeah. At that point, Alesis went through a pretty big change. There was a bankruptcy, and you know, a lot of people were speculating that Andromeda caused the bankruptcy. It didn't. It's basically, you know, around the same time ADAT sales started to fall. You know, we're just about to head into hard disk recording at that point, and you know, DigiDesign had already started doing stuff, and they started with Sound Designer too, and then they, you know, they started, you know, building that out, and eventually their thing became Pro Tools, right? But the times were changing, and people were moving away from you know, digital tape, and Alesis was a little slow to react to that, and so in 2001, there was a bankruptcy, and InMusic bought them. And I got laid off for about a month, I believe, and then I got hired back on. And the company was a lot different. We were like a much smaller kind of tight-knit, lean and hungry kind of engineering team. And there was a new chip that was being developed around that time called the 1K DSP. And this chip was really great at doing things that didn't require memory. Like, you know, if you asked it to do a reverb, no. But if you wanted it to, you know, make an oscillator, if you wanted to do a filter with it, it was great. So, you know, the natural sort of thing is to do a synth based around it. And there was a young product manager named Ben Ling that worked on that, you know, designed that synth, designed that voice path with, you know, some consultation with sound design, which was me and Mike Peak. And and then it basically sort of ushered in this new era for Alesis of synths, where as before we were, you know, very much about, you know, doing things in an analog way. And it was our first experiments into this virtual analog area. And we had some apprehension about it because, you know, we'd just spent all this time talking about how like analog is really, you know, the only sort of solution, right? Don't accept any, you know, imitation. And now we come out with a virtual analog, but it takes a lot of that philosophy into consideration. It's about as analog as you can get without being analog. We wanted to make sure that it was nice and warm and round and big sounding, and I think we achieved that to a large extent.
I'll tell you what, I had the Micron, which is the smaller version, which came out a little bit after it, I believe.
Right.
And that was, I'm trying to recall exactly, but I think that was the first synthesizer that I bought brand spanking new. Like,
Yeah.
had not been pre-owned by anybody else. And like, I bought that at a time when I was flat broke at that point. I think, because this would have been around what, like, I I'm trying to think the year that it came out. I want to say it was close to 2000, maybe like maybe 98, somewhere around there.
It would be post 2000s because the bankruptcy
Okay.
happened in 2001. So I would say
Yeah.
like 2002, 2003.
Yeah. Because I had just had my son, so yeah. I remember being flat broke. Like I had lots of synths that I had gotten used and through friends and that kind of thing, but like that was the first one that I was like, all right, I'm gonna buy this, and I love the form factor and all. And I got it. Man, I tell you
Nice.
what, to this day, I absolutely love the sound of that thing. And I know
Great.
there's lots of people who debate back and forth on what virtual analogs they like. You know, some people talk about the viruses and this and that. I actually will take this sound over just about any other virtual analog synth. Something about it,
Wow.
I really enjoy it. And I've had friends of mine who've had a lot of virtual analog synths as well, and they agree with me. You know, it has its pluses and its minuses, but man, that thing is a blast to play with. And the actual Ion with all the knob control on it, oh, that thing is a blast. Like I love the way it's laid out, and I love the screen on it, especially considering the time period that it came out. The way that the screen moves on that thing is really cool.
Yeah. That was Ben's doing. He had the vision for how that screen moved around. So that was him. He did a great job. And yeah, the Micron was done by another engineer at Alesis, who basically built on the Ion engine, and he came up with the form factor. This guy named Brett Victor, and Brett has gone on to do user interface stuff for like Apple and beyond. He's a really smart guy. He did the thing in the Micron where you know, presets weren't necessarily tied to numbers anymore. They didn't have these, you know, preset number slot like, you know, this bass that I want is in preset number 32 or whatever. It's all sort of alphabetic and kind of easy to parse. He had a different way of looking at things, and it was really interesting to see like the sort of innovative UI that he came up with to get around on Micron. And yeah, Micron did really well. That was like you know, really top seller for Alesis for quite some time. And that engine you know, went on into the Akai stuff as well. That's in the Miniac. Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah. I mean, and it's just fun to play is the bottom line. Like, you know, and like you said, like as far as the Micron is concerned, it had kind of like hotkey routes on it where you could, you know, press a button and then press a key, like an actual
Yep.
keypad key, and you could jump to that section of the synthesizer and use it that way. So
Right.
programming on it wasn't nearly as bad as you would think it would be just by looking at it. You know what I mean? Just looking at, oh, well, where'd all the knobs go? You know, but that thing, you could actually kind of dig right into it, you know?
Yeah, that was the hope, at least. It's a way to get into, you know, all the parameters of that synth, which is actually more complex than the Ion, but with less top panel controls. And it was a tough user interface problem to solve. I think Brett did a good job with figuring all that stuff out. You know, because it added like things like effects, it added a sequencer to it. You know, Ion didn't have either of those. Yeah,
The
it's
reverb on that was actually kind of cool. I used that to good effect.
nice. Yeah, that was another new chip at the time. It was the SCR DSP that yeah, I don't know if a lot of people knew this, but Alesis had a semiconductor division too. It was one of the things that Keith Barr was really interested in, and the chips that we used in all these synthesizers were created by Alesis. They were,
That's wild.
yeah, they were Alesis chips. Even down to like the analog chips that we did for Andromeda too. There's a ASO chip that has 2 oscillators on it, an ASF chip with 2 filters, and all analog inside of a chip. So yeah, there was a lot of technology going on that was proprietary to Alesis, that I was able to take advantage of, and it was a lot of fun.
Now, after you left Alesis, this would have been much later on.
Not that much later. There was one more project that I did at Alesis, which was the Fusion workstation.
Oh yes, yeah.
That was a beast.
That had a lot of different synthesis engines in it. I had one of those as well, and I actually loved mine. Like, I thought, I have my thoughts on the way it looked, but you know,
yeah,
it's different. You know, if you're a big fan of sitting in a car, you might really like it, or you know.
Yeah.
It had that kind of dashboard experience, but
exactly, yeah.
But that thing, the thing that really struck me about that, matter of fact, that was one of the synthesizers that made me have a setup like I have now, because it made me realize that, so I sold my Micron to get it, because I thought, okay, well, it has that engine. I thought, oh, it must be similar. The engines were sort of similar, but pretty different. But yeah. I ended up really finding out that, like, even if you like a piece of gear, don't sell it.
Yeah.
You know, because it wasn't that I didn't like the Fusion. It was just that I'm a hoarder, and I if I like a piece of gear, I want to have it later on. But the physical modeling synthesis in it, and it had like an acoustic modeling, or like a breath thing that you could do with it too.
It had a couple of sort of breathy based models. It had like a reed model and a flute model.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, you could get some pretty weird stuff happening with those models. They were really touchy to program, but some interesting results out of there. It had a virtual analog engine, of course. It had an FM engine, and it had a sample playback engine. And polyphony on it was like, if you just did sample playback, it was 200 voices of polyphony. And
it had a hard drive in it where you could load like sound fonts into it, so you could layer like sound fonts with like your FM engine, and you could get so crazy with that thing. Right,
with the hard drive in it, you started to not really have much. You know, you didn't have to worry about memory space as much anymore, which is a weird sort of feeling in a hardware synth. So I'd never had that before. It was all about like trying to make things small and so that it would fit into a ROM. But at this point, when you've got a hard drive, it's like, you know, sky's the limit. Just fill it up.
It was really ahead of its time in that way too.
Yeah. And you could have all the engines running at the same time too. It was dynamically allocating its processor power, so everything can run at the same time, and it was quite a engineering feat. The digital guy that worked on that, Bob Szymanski, went on to Apple as well. A lot of smart guys came through Alesis, and I feel really lucky to have worked with them. So that workstation was a giant project. It was the first one that I was actually project manager for, and it was not perfect. It could have gone better, but it was like one of the things that I'm also kind of thankful for, in that I learned a lot on that project, and it helped me tremendously as I went over to M Audio, and then started working on projects there. A lot of them were sort of smaller, easier projects. Like one of the first things that I worked on there was the mid-air controller, which was basically like a wireless oxygen. And that I learned a lot about, like the FCC and broadcast bandwidths. And
what sort of role were you having involved on a project like that?
I came on to sort of like bring it through production. Like the initial concepts had already been done for that, so it was more of like coordinating with the program manager to get through manufacturing, and with the marketing team for launching it. And I can't say enough about the M Audio marketing team at the time. They were smoking. I don't know if you remember all the ads around that time period of like Oxygen and the controllers and stuff like that, but they were showing, people doing things that you'd never seen before and now are kind of commonplace. Like somebody's, working on beats at a coffee shop or whatever. Somebody's working on beats on a subway. And like, that sort of thing was, like I said, it's commonplace now, but at that time it was sort of revolutionary to see that. And M Audio, I feel really changed the industry in making things mobile and laptop based, and all the things that we kind of take for granted now. So from midair we started. Oh, there's the Fusion. There's your dashboard. Another thing about the Fusion, while we got that up, it was supposed to also kind of it was supposed to do a couple of things. It was supposed to feel like a airplane wing, like it was this sort of high quality, expensive private jet, right? And the sort of dashboard feel of it too was also supposed to be like more like a luxury sort of car, an automobile that that you would feel was solid and like you can relax in.
Yeah, it's funny you were saying that, because like right as I was pulling it up, I was gonna say, yeah, I used to call it my airship.
Nice. Well, yeah. And the Fusion 8 was literally shaped like a wing.
That was the one that I had too. I had the Fusion 8 HD, and the downside on it was that I guess when it came out, it had some software bugs, and mine had a couple of quality issues on it as far as like keys being messed up. But what I did was I sent it off, and then I had it come back, and then I loaded that sucker up. Steve. Oh God, I'm kicking myself for forgetting the name off. I want to say Howell from Hollow Sun.
Yep, right.
So rest in peace. That guy was amazing, and he did a ton of awesome presets for it, and you could buy them. He did a sound pack called Nebula and a few others, and let me tell you, that stuff was phenomenal. And anybody who would ever come and play with my setup, they would say, oh, I heard about the Fusion, and they would kind of like scoff at it at first, and I have a go on it, and as soon as they play it, they'd shut up and they'd be like, I need to get one of these.
Yeah. Steve did a great job. It was such a gigantic, huge project. It was really kind of hard to manage, and it ended up being delayed. So when it finally launched, it was kind of rushed. Like really, it needed some more sound design to be done. It needed some, additional like testing. So it was kind of an unfortunate situation. Like when you launch a synth, you can't ever, do it again. There's no do-overs after you launch something. And so unfortunately, a lot of people, got kind of not very favorable idea of it, and it's a shame because like it was a really powerful engine, and I think Steve really proved that in the time period after that launch.
Mm-hmm. There's still actually a pretty there's still a pretty active Facebook group to it as well. Like it has a sort of cult following to it.
Yeah. And every once in a while, like I'll look on vintage synth explorers and try and, because I need to look something up, and then I'd actually run across the Fusion entry for it, and was really sort of happy to see that they considered it to be a really great synth engine. And at least I can take a little bit of pride in that we did something that has at least some recognition, after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
I recently
lessons away from it as well. That's always good.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said, and if you're taking lessons away from it as well, that's always something good.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I learn things on every project. But yeah, Fusion was a big one. That was the first big project. And it's really, if you're making a workstation, it's exponentially harder than just making a normal synthesizer, because like, it's not just like, you're making a synth and, not just a single synth, but an FM synth and a VA synth and a, Rompler and, physical modeling synth all at the same time. But we're also making like, hard disk recorder, sequencer. If it's a workstation, it all has to be kind of self-contained, so you have effects in there as well. And it's not like it's just kind of the sum of the parts. There's this whole integration aspect of, making a giant project like that just kind of, makes it exponentially harder. I feel like in our industry, it's about the hardest thing to do to put together a workstation synth like that. And like, kudos to the big manufacturers that do it so regularly, like, Yamaha and Korg and Roland. It's like, that's some serious technology that they're putting out.
So after that, you were at M Audio, and you did work on the Venom project as well, right?
Yes.
We talked before the show, because
right.
that was, so a lot of people that follow me know that the Venom is in my infamous list. Yeah, because that one, I actually enjoyed the sound of it so much, but I loathed programming on it.
yeah.
It was mainly because of the lack of communication back and forth between the software in it. Like, it just, I don't know if it was just my setup or what, but they just did not talk well together for me.
Yeah.
What was it like working on that project? Because I know that project was at a tumultuous time, but it was also it was a pretty interesting synthesizer in that, like, so like the oscillators were sample based,
right,
if I'm recalling correctly, and
yep.
There was something else about the way the filter was done on it, but I know that, I mean, there was a heavy focus on distortion with that synthesizer as well.
Right, there was this tube saturation limiter like that, I believe fed the filter, so you could you can really get some drive out of it. It had kind of a gritty sound to it anyway, just by the nature of how it generated sounds. It was based on this Dream chip that was really good at doing like general MIDI stuff, like, doing pianos and, just pushing samples through. And so we were like, what can we do with this chip? And we found a DSP guy named Andreas Tofarn that like really took that chip to a different place. Like he gave it the ring mod and the FM, and did the filter types, and we voiced it with like raw oscillator waveforms from a lot of synths out of my collection, and from some other sources, and this Dream chip gave those those samples a different quality depending on like how far you pushed it. You could really grunge things up if you wanted to. So like once we figured out that that was kind of the sound of the synthesizer, like the Venom name came fairly quickly after that. And you know, I gave the sound design team some direction to go in that direction. Like, you know, it's at that time, you know, there's so many different virtual analog synths out there already, and they all, you know, have great things about them in their own right. There's a lot of like really polished, you know, nice sounding virtual analogs. And so we wanted to go in this different direction, and our engine sort of lent itself to that anyway. And yeah, I think we got like a really sort of nice, gritty, edgy, grungy sort of sound out of it. That was different. The time period that it was created in was, and we talked about this a little bit before the show, was like during the recession. And it was pretty tough, you know, getting stuff to happen during that time period. Like, I'm sure, you know, people have their stories about going through that era. Like,
oh yeah,
you know, you're all afraid of like losing your jobs, and you know, I was like, all right, am I the next person on this you know list? And I went through, I think, you know, like 3 different firmware guys. Every time you go through a firmware guy, like there's another engineer that has to like figure out what the previous engineer did, and that's not easy. And so there's some time with like getting up to speed on that, and then you know, taking over a project, figuring it out, but then you know, starting to get into that mindset of like designing in that framework. And the same thing happened with the people that worked on the editor. I went through 3 different people before we finally ended up with Tony at SciCraft, who was really he was my first choice initially.
And I know he was doing other projects as well. Like he was, because I'm pretty sure he did stuff with Dave Smith Instruments as well, right?
I'm not sure, but that doesn't surprise me. He's done editors for like lots of different people in the industry, and you know, even like the biggest player in the industry, Yamaha, he's worked with them too. So like he's been just about everywhere, done a lot of editors, and done them really well. And like as I was mentioning before we got on the air, there's like, you know, it takes 2 to tango with your editor and the hardware needing to really, you know, communicate well. There's some timing issues there that need to get resolved, right? And so with all the sort of turmoil of the recession, it was really hard to kind of coordinate that and make that happen. There were a lot of delays with Venom in getting it to market, but kind of the upshot of that was that it gave me like a luxurious amount of time to do the sound design on it. And of all the preset sets that I've worked on, this is one that I'm most proud of. I think that there's a lot of like, you know, extra life that has been put into those sounds, where you know, even routing like, you know, an LFO to panning by just like maybe one value, like a value of 1, just moves it around a little bit and gives it a little bit extra life. That's the kind of stuff that I got into, like really microscopic, trying to like make things move in a way that's not digital. Like
when you were programming on that, were you using just the hardware synth that we see that was released, or what were you programming the synth sounds on?
No, you had to use the editor. So I was
That's
using
kind of
that.
what I was getting at, is because for me it was frustrating, because I like you said, like, you know, the sound set that was there, I was like, oh, this is phenomenal. And then I started messing with it, and for me, the editor never really worked properly on my setup for whatever reason. And I don't suspect it was completely user error. but but that being said, that's why it makes me speak so venomously about it sometimes. Because like I wanted to dive into all, like, I'm gonna pull up a picture of that editor, because the editor it shows how ridiculous the engine is. There's so much to it, and I wanted to just dive into all of that goodness, and for me it just wasn't working. But the sounds that were programmed in there were, like you said, they were fantastic.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's unfortunate that you didn't get a chance to play with it, because it really was fun to mess around with.
Grabbing another one and just messing with it again, and who knows, it'll either go through a window or it won't.
Yeah, at this point, like, the editor hasn't been updated in a while, so I'm not really sure, like, how
it would. I have actually, and this is, again, this gets back to you don't sell something if you enjoy using it. I keep my old computers and I leave them in the state that I last used them before I updated to a new computer. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah, like I can actually go back to computers of that time period, load it onto that, and it should work, hopefully.
Yeah.
But
I'm the same way.
Yeah, like I have a bunch of stuff that I'm like, you know what? Like, my wife yells at me all the time about my old MacBook. Like, why don't you just sell that stuff? You don't use it, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, it's not going anywhere. Drop it.
Can you talk to my wife?
Oh, trust me. You don't want that, because I do get hit. Like,
oh, okay.
I don't win. The stuff is still here, but I have the scars for it.
I see. All right.
You have to be willing to accept a certain amount of physical damage.
Yeah. No, my wife is really, really patient with me. So thank you, honey.
Well, anybody who like ourselves has a nice modular rig, that they have a patient partner, because that kind of stuff, we find it beautiful, but for some reason my wife, she's like, that looks like a mess.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's like a Jackson Pollock painting. What are you talking about? Yeah, so I did want to get into back to Wave Razer. So Wave Razer, we were talking a little bit before the show about this. So this is a new VST that you guys are doing, and the part that I want to jump right into first is this thing does this weird oscillator fragmentation thing where essentially you have a waveform, and then you can select sections of the waveform and you can manipulate them separately and do all manner of ridiculousness too. And by doing that, you can actually synthesize new sounds. So it's not just like scrolling through a wavetable. You're actually creating new aspects of each part of the waveform, and you can do it in like a harmonically musical way.
That's true. Yes. The thing about Wave Razer is it pays particular attention to the phase of the waves that are being chopped up. So you can have like the first quarter of the sine wave, and the second quarter of a sawtooth wave, and the third quarter of a triangle wave, fourth quarter of a square wave, and they will all stay in those quarters unless you start moving them around or messing with them. So it's like a phase coherent wave slicer, and you're not limited to quarter waves. You can have up to 16 different segments, and these segments can be stretched out into sort of BPM territory rather than audio rate, or they can be even they don't even have to be like 16ths. They can be like 64ths, or even down to like individual samples, although that doesn't really make very much happen. But it's a weird new concept of creating a waveform output, and it made us really think about these shapes that we were so familiar with, like, you know, we've seen sine waves, and we've seen, you know, square waves and sawtooth waves and everything for so long. But for me, it's been just kind of like an abstraction. Like, I didn't really think of what those lines meant to the sound. And now I've done some thinking about it, but like, I'm still like not sure exactly what they mean. Yeah, I think we need like a wave.
I'm not sure if this is gonna work, but I want to try it. So we're gonna experiment live on the air.
All right.
So what I'm gonna try and do is I want to try and see if I can't play a little bit of this video. I don't know if the audio will come through, so the chat can let me know if it's coming through. But I do want people to actually see the user interface in action here. So because in the video on your website, it kind of shows this, and it's really wild. So I just want to show this one aspect so people can kind of get an idea of what's happening here.
Waverazer's patent-pending oscillator technology slices familiar waveforms and recombines them to create tormented futuristic sounds. Once a segment is selected, you can edit its pitch and volume or phase and DC offset. You can also select a new waveform using the wave category and variation browsers.
This is the part. So this stuff right here had me kind of freaking out a little bit. Now this will do pitch and amplitude on this section, correct?
Right, yep.
And you're saying you can add as many sections in here as you would like. Like here we have 4 sections.
Right, up to 16.
Up to 16. And you can add that noise section in too, which that kind of shook me mentally.
Yeah.
And then when you click this button up here, that becomes like a oscilloscope of your output.
That's right. Yep.
Okay, that's pretty darn awesome. And yeah, so it looks like that did work, and I think people could check that out. So that's pretty cool. Because I'll probably go back to the AM section as well when we get to that. But the thing that I wanted to talk about as far as that's concerned is, so not only are you able to, it's not just like as if you were drawing the waveform, because there's synthesizers that have been around for forever, you know, well, not forever, but for quite a while, where you can draw your wave shape. But this is something different than that.
Right, right. Drawing was always kind of fun to, you know, just kind of draw whatever's in your mind and see what comes out. But like, it really comes down to those simple sort of shapes. Like if you drew like a really squiggly line, you more often than not end up with kind of noise on the output.
Yeah.
You with Waverazor, you have you know, selections of waveforms that are, you know, for lack of a better word, coherent. They, you know, they're going to create a certain amount of harmonics, certain types of harmonics. And then when you drop them into the Waverazor oscillator setting, slicing them all up, they start taking on characteristics of all the waveforms that are in the series, like whichever ones that you've chosen to drop into the segments, and with an additional sort of strangeness that is sort of inherent in slicing up waveforms. There's oftentimes a discontinuity between the wave shapes, and that ends up adding a more sort of square wave kind of harmonic spectra. And it's these discontinuities and how you slice it that really is kind of the key to Waverazor. Like if you can think of a sine wave, and just chop it up. Like that's really not going to do anything. That's all just going to be a sine wave again. But as soon as you like, change the pitch of one of those slices, or as soon as you, swap in a sawtooth wave and there's a discontinuity there, then it starts mattering like where you slice it, because it's going to catch that wave at a different point. It's going to have like, a different kind of discontinuity there. And that starts generating sort of weird beat frequencies and other oscillations that starts getting into, this kind of, it reminds me of the Casio phase distortion synthesis a bit.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
We don't fade out the waveform like they do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got a little bit of that kind of edge happening, and it's happening on every slice in your wave shape. It doesn't have to have slices, but you could have like one segment and you've got a single cycle waveform. But you can also just go crazy and have 16 slices and have all of them be discontinuous, and that starts becoming crazy. Like you can detune all the individual segments from each other and get a sort of super saw kind of sound out of just a single oscillator.
Now you have the XY controls on those, right? And that works in the segments as well?
Right. So we have, I'm sorry?
Can you automate the XYs for the individual segments?
Yeah, you can. So the way that most of the patches are set up currently is you have an XY controller on the left and right side that is automatable. The central control is an editing control. It's not automatable yet. The one that we saw in the video there, that's mainly for just editing. Or you can reach up and grab it in real time. It's just not recordable yet at this point. But the two vector controls, we're calling vector controls on either side. The two smaller circles are like sort of XY controls that are assignable. And I've assigned them to various things in the presets. Like a lot of the times it'll scan through the wave index. So as you move them around, the wave segments will all change their waveforms. On a few patches, I've set up it to sweep around pitch. The right-hand side vector control is usually a filter, and it's filter cutoff on Y and resonance on X, and just gives you some stuff to play with. Hopefully, that's fun and at least a little bit sonically rewarding at this point. But we have plans on really expanding the access to that. Right now we don't have access to all the parameters.
I'm going to show them the syncing video as well.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Because I wanted to talk about this a little bit as well. So there's an aspect to this that's pretty darn interesting, and you can see some of the XY.
Each waveform segment can have different harmonic content, with individual harmonics subject to amplitude modulation at a rate and level determined by the contents of each fraction. Instead of simply modulating the entire waveform on and off like traditional ring mod, the oscillator modulates harmonics to different levels in a sequence pattern.
Yeah, that stuff sounds, I mean, just so harmonically rich, and
That
Yeah.
was actually the Mutant AM demo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And me with my crazy marketing voice. The Mutant AM stuff, it's like if you think of the slices of a waveform and you turned off every other slice, that would be like, a ring mod of like a square wave on another oscillator. But then if you put different waveforms in every slice, it means that there's like different harmonic content in each of those slices. And the harmonics and the fundamental, they can be either there or not there in any given slice, dependent on whatever is there at the time. And those things can be modulated too, so you're not particularly restricted to just like a quarter of a waveform or whatever. It could be like the first part of the waveform, it could be the back end of the waveform, depending on how you're modulating things. So you've got this kind of crazy matrix there that, like, if you think of on the x-axis is all your slices, and on a y-axis, just think of like all the harmonic series of each waveform. And these harmonics are either there or not there in each one of those steps, or they might even be at just different levels rather than on or off. I've described it as this kind of crazy matrix of amplitude modulation that is just kind of dependent on whatever you have in those slices. And I think that's where the richness comes from, is you have these, like, I think it's essentially like multiple ring mods happening at the same time within a single wave.
Yeah, and the sync that I actually clicked on the wrong video because I did want to show the sync, because what's weird about the sync on there is that you can, so you're doing hard syncing on individual steps of the waveforms, like individual sections of it. And I'll share that so you can see it as well. There it is.
Since each wave cycle is divided into fractions and phase reset is controlled per segment, multiple simultaneous hard sync points can be set up within a cycle and even beyond a single cycle. With multi-sync engaged, modulating wave fractions to different frequencies creates a new type of harmonically rich hard sync.
Okay, and let me get back here. So yeah, I mean, just the approach of this synthesizer is kind of, you're doing things that they have a foundation in traditional synthesis, but they're moving in a different direction. Like, they're allowing you to kind of challenge the traditional way of handling things like sync, and handling things like drawing a waveform, and handling things like AM. So definitely looks pretty interesting. How are you guys feeling about CPU usage on these things, and are you considering at all doing anything like iOS? Because I do see that you have Linux, a Linux version coming as well. Any possibility of that kind of stuff running on something like a Raspberry Pi or some of these low powered devices?
Yeah. So I don't have the latest computer that like I'm actually developing on a 2010 MacBook Pro, and I can get 7 instances running in Logic fairly easily. So like it's not a pushover, but it's not like a serious hog either. It's basically like Rob has done, embedded systems programming before, and in embedded systems, you have to really optimize your code and make sure it fits into small memory space, and works under like maybe not the highest sort of processor power, and so that really kind of translates into how he writes plugins, and I think it's really great. I've sort of run into this issue in the past with like if guys have only developed for computers, they tend not to optimize as well, because you've got all this horsepower there, and they just think like why not use it all, or or there's just no need for an optimization stage. But Rob doesn't come from that background. I think he's like kind of the perfect guy to be coding this plugin, which is pretty intense. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but he's doing it very efficiently. So thank you, Rob.
So what is the tie-in with, is it pronounced MOK or is it MOK, or how are you handling that?
It's MOK. It's basically kind of an abbreviation of Media Overkill.
Yeah, Media Overkill. Now, how is that tied in with the Tracktion company? So
Tracktion, I've known the CEO of Tracktion, James Woody Woodburn, since Avid. He was a portfolio manager there while I was a keyboard product manager. And he contacted me, I think fairly early on, like in 2013, 14, and wanted to know if I was interested in doing a synthesizer for Tracktion. And we ended up doing Biotech, where I worked with Wolfram Franke and Christina Childs and Mike Wall on this kind of really conceptually interesting soft synth that is basically explores this dichotomy of like nature versus technology. And there's a central ring controller there that allows you to sort of visually see whether you're sort of more on the natural side or more on the technology side. And it does things like it morphs between samples of like grassy fields and wind into like more sort of synthetic sounds like synthy pads or bass lines, and even drums and percussion things. Really interesting project, and I don't know, worth a listen if you haven't heard it yet. And so we got to talking about sort of the plugin market in general, and how to kind of break through and make some noise in like the current landscape, which is fairly crowded, right? And we had this idea of sort of trying to band together for a little bit more support and a little bit more mass in getting things done and getting things out into the world. Like the idea is to find a cool group of people and try and do some cool things. So it was kind of the perfect opportunity for MOK to work with Tracktion to get Waverazor out. Tracktion provides worldwide distribution and marketing support, and I can't say enough about them. Like, we couldn't have done it without them. And it's an open program. It's called Tracktion Presents, and if there's any other developers out there that find themselves in the same situation, I recommend at least talking to Tracktion about it, because they've been quite a help for us in getting Waverazor out there.
That's pretty awesome. What I'm doing right now is I'm setting some stuff up on Twitter because I'm actually going to give away. I have 3 copies of Wave Razer and 3 copies of Waveform, courtesy of both MOK and or MOK. Excuse me. See, I have to pound this stuff into my own head, and Tracktion as well. So if you're in the live chat, you will see the tweet instructions, which is to tweet at Flux302, #MOK, #WaveRazer. And I was looking for Traction's actual Twitter handle, and coming up short. So I'm just gonna keep it at that, and #Waveform, which is their new DAW as well.
Right.
Which, you know, they go hand in hand. So definitely checking that stuff out. Yeah, the user interface of Wave Razer is completely unique. I've messed with it lightly so far. I've only had a chance to play with this stuff for about a couple of days, actually a little less, like a little bit here and there, and I started messing with it. And the first thing that I noticed was the whole segmenting aspect of the waveform, and I kind of lost my mind, and I said, "Oh no!" Through traditional press channels, I was informed about it, and as soon as I found out about it, I kind of started looking into it, and I always like to find out, okay, well, who was involved on this, and then I saw your name pop up, and I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, this is." Perfect opportunity, because I had wanted to talk to you for a while. So it kind of worked out very, very nicely that I was able to get you on the show, and I could shine some light on this product as well as dive into the past and find out about some of my personal favorites, which you've had quite a hand in. So I really appreciate you coming on the show. And do you have anything else that you'd like to discuss before we close out the show?
Well, I definitely want to say it's been a real pleasure and an honor to be here. I am humbled that you've considered me for an interview. Actually, like I just I've seen. I just got done watching the John Bowen interview that you did.
Oh, that's great. That's some great stuff.
Yeah, talk about like, hey, I'm nowhere near that guy. That guy is like, awesome.
I highly recommend everybody check that stuff out too. John Bowen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's a really great guy. I've met him a few times, and every time I've met that guy, he's always willing to just talk, share his opinions, discuss all kinds of stuff. And, sometimes it'll go way over my head, and other times he'll try to bring it back down, but it's always a good conversation.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I've had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times, and just to be considered on the same. This is not coming out right. Like, I'm not even considered on the same wavelength of him. Like, if my interview is half as good as his, then I'm happy. So,
well, I do really appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm really wishing you guys the best of luck with Wave Razer and anything else that you come out with in the future. I'm definitely going to be playing with it a good bit. The interface is just really inspiring, and I love the fact that you also have a oscilloscope on the output. Like, anything that has oscilloscopes on the output is it might be eye candy, but it's useful eye candy.
Yeah, we had the same idea. Particularly when you've got something that is so waveform intensive, it really helps to be able to see what's going on. So we think it's not frivolous. It's there because it really does help you in the sound design. Absolutely. And while we're talking about user interface, a lot of people know that we owe the users a lot more user interface there. So we're working towards a editor release where you can get to all the parameters of Wave Razer. It's pretty late at this point, but we're still working on it, and we think we've got something that is really as groundbreaking as the Wave Razer oscillator itself, because we have a lot of parameters to get to. Like if you completely max out a Wave Razer oscillator section, like just the oscillators themselves with all 16 segments in each, in each oscillator, that's 891 parameters, which is, more than many synthesizers out there. And then if you add like the filter sections and all the modulation routes and everything, there's a lot of stuff to get into and a lot of stuff that we have to manage for the UI. But I think we found a way to do it and make it really fun and fast. And so, hopefully other people will agree, and we'll get that out to you as soon as we can make it. We're looking at probably towards the end of summer at this point for that release. And, I'll keep people updated on my Facebook page or at, Media Overkill on Facebook.
I'll definitely get the word out as well. So,
Cool.
As most people know, I have the press channels or whatever, but really I do all this purely as a fan. Like I don't get paid to do the show. I don't get paid to do press. My website doesn't have any ads on it. Like I do it completely as a fan of synthesis, as a fan of music technology and the people behind it. So when I see interesting ideas and designs that come up that kind of inspire me, it's something that I try to latch onto and make sure that people find out about it because it's really interesting, And
I'm a synth fan too, obviously. And like what you're doing is a big service to, our industry. And, if nobody's said it, like we definitely thank you for the service that you're providing. It's like, it's a big job. And I don't know how, if people really realize how hard it is to put out a show like this consistently. It's a lot of work. So thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah, and just to that same topic real quick, I'll also say, support B-Boy Tech Report. Beat People is another show that I'm a part of. The Producers Hangout. If you go back and look at our archives over there, we have 35 episodes of cool interviews and whatnot over there. Learn Your Gear. There's, it's a group of friends, and we're all really big fans of music gear and people like Taiho over here. So, as far as me, I'm going to sign off and just say I have shop.fluxwithit.com is where I put out just like solely independent stuff. And that kind of stuff that I do, the independent stuff like that, is really more of like it's a way for people to support without me having to say, hey, support me all the time. Instead of, because these types of videos and synth videos, that kind of stuff doesn't get nearly as much attention as if I were to start screaming about black helicopters in the sky and, conspiracy theories of ancient aliens. If I did a YouTube channel like that, believe me, I would have way more money. So instead of doing that, I put out sample packs that are independent, separate from my normal freelance work and that sort of thing. So if you go over there, I just put out a pack called 8-Bit Dip, which is pretty darn cool. It's a bunch of interesting drum samples and found sounds, and then I process them through 8-bit 11 kilohertz samplers. So you get this cool kind of grunge and sound to them, and they work in pretty much every sampler out there. I specifically formatted a bunch of the kits for Machine just because I enjoy using it. But yeah, so go check that out in the other packs. And if you won a copy of Wave Razer, I expect you to put it up on Twitter, tell people about it, do Instagram video, whatever you want to do, even if it's just ugly phone video, doesn't matter. Help get the word out, because that's how people make a living and feed their kids. I know you got a 4-year-old, right?
Yeah, that's right.
He likes to eat, right? So
yeah.
And help people out. That's what I like to say. There's actual real people behind the music industry making the products that you use, and I try to have people actually be able to eat. So,
well, thank you, Flux.
Hey, have a great night, and thanks again for coming on. I'm going to stop the broadcast. You stay on here for just a second, and there we go.